My neighbor Dave worked at Boeing for 38 years, got his pension locked in at 62, stayed until 67 because the financial planner showed him a Monte Carlo simulation that said he had a 12% chance of running out of money if he retired early. Dave died at 71 on a Tuesday. His wife told me he had plane tickets to New Zealand sitting on his desk, tickets he'd been putting off for 9 years. Here's a question nobody wants to ask. What if the entire retirement planning industry is optimizing for the wrong outcome? Look, I've spent the last decade with accountants and fiscal lawyers, managing my own money, watching hundreds of people navigate this exact decision. And I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound insane. Sometimes you should retire even when the spreadsheet says you can't afford it. Not because I'm some motivational guru telling you to follow your dreams, but because the math everyone's using is solving for a problem that doesn't actually exist. I'm going to walk you through 5 reasons why this is true. And by the end, you're going to understand why the retirement planning industrial complex has a massive incentive to keep you terrified. We're going to use one central metaphor that'll make this clear. Retirement planning is a game of chicken with death, and most people are losing that game on purpose. Here's the thing. The entire financial services industry runs on one fuel: fear. They need you scared because scared people pay fees. Scared people buy annuities with 4% load fees. Scared people stay in jobs they hate because some advisor showed them a red line on a chart that dips below 0 in year 23 of retirement. But that red line is based on assumptions that have almost nothing to do with how humans actually behave. First reason to retire, even if you think you can't afford it. You're probably never going to spend the money anyway. I know how that sounds. But there's actual data on this, and it's kind of shocking. BlackRock, which manages about $10 trillion, did a study called To Spend or Not Spend. And separately, a guy named Michael Kitces, who basically trains financial advisors, he did his own analysis using completely different methodology. They both found the same thing. After about 17 to 18 years in retirement, roughly half of all retirees still have 80% or more of what they retired with. Let me say that again. Half of retirees die with basically all their money still sitting there. These people gave up years of their lives, the healthy years, sitting in office chairs and Zoom calls, so they could save money they would never use. Now you might be thinking, well, that's just responsible people being conservative. But is it? Or is it a complete failure of the system? There's a parable I think about a lot. Japanese fishermen used to transport live eels in tanks on their boats. Problem was, the eels would barely move in the tank, and by the time they got to market, the meat was mushy and worthless. So they started putting a small predator fish in the tank. The eels would swim around, stay active, stay alive. The meat stayed firm, sold for 3 times as much. The retirement planning industry is that predator fish. They need you moving, they need you anxious, because that's how they stay in business. But unlike the eels, you're not getting any benefit from the fear. You're just swimming in circles until you die. The psychology here is pretty straightforward. People who spent 40 years saving have trained their brains to associate spending with danger. They optimize for accumulation. You can't just flip a switch at 65 and suddenly become a person who's comfortable spending down a pile of money. It goes against everything you've conditioned yourself to do. There's actually a term for this in behavioral economics: the paradox of thrift. The habits that helped you accumulate wealth are the exact same habits that prevent you from enjoying it. But now you might think, okay, sure, some people oversave, but what if I'm not one of them? What if I actually do run out? Fair question. Which brings me to reason number 2. Your health is going to fail way before your money does, and nobody wants to talk about it. The World Health Organization tracks something called healthy life expectancy. Not how long you'll live, how long you'll be actually healthy. Able to travel, move around, do the things retired people are supposedly saving up to do? Want to guess what that number is in the United States? 66.1 years old. That's it. 66. Most people are planning to retire at 65, maybe 67. That gives you 1 to 2 years of healthy retirement on average before something breaks. Here's a story that'll make this concrete. I know a guy, call him Robert, retired at 68, financially perfect. Had $2.2 million invested, no debt, pension covering 70% of his expenses. Spreadsheet said he could live until 95 and still leave money to his kids. 6 months into retirement, he had a heart attack, survived. But now he's on blood thinners, can't do the hiking trip he planned, gets exhausted walking around the grocery store. He told me the only thing he thinks about is the 3 years he could have retired earlier, when he could have actually done something. This is the game of chicken I'm talking about. You're driving toward a cliff called health failure. And every year you work is you pressing the accelerator, betting you'll have time to enjoy the money later. But here's what the retirement planning industry won't tell you. The cliff doesn't move. It's sitting there at 66, give or take. Your retirement date is the only variable you control. And most people are timing it wrong. In the UK, the Financial Times reported that fewer than 1 in 10 men reach retirement in good health. 1 in 10. That means 90% of men work their entire lives to buy freedom they no longer have the body to use. This isn't a math problem. This is a systems problem. The incentives are completely backwards. Think about it. Who benefits when you retire later? Your employer gets more years of your productivity. The government gets more years of payroll taxes. Financial advisors get more years of fees on a larger portfolio. Nobody in that chain has any incentive to tell you to retire at 62 when you could work until 67. But your body? Your body has a very strong incentive. It's trying to tell you something. Most people just aren't listening because the spreadsheet is louder. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Reason number 3, you can change the plan. This sounds obvious, but nobody actually does it. Everyone's running retirement calculations based on their current spending. If you spend $7,000 a month now, the calculator assumes you need $7,000 a month in retirement, adjusted for inflation, until you die. But that's insane. Your spending in retirement isn't a law of physics. It's a choice. Let me tell you about a couple I know. Call them Tom and Linda. Tom was making $170,000 a year as a systems engineer. They were spending about $9,000 a month. His retirement calculator said he needed $2.4 million to retire safely. He had $1.7 million, so he figured he needed 5 more years. But here's what they did instead. They test drove a $6,000 a month budget for a full year while Tom was still working. They cut the country club membership, started cooking more. Canceled 2 streaming services they never watched anyway. Took 1 trip instead of 3. And you know what they found? It was fine. More than fine. They weren't any less happy. That test year did something the spreadsheet couldn't do. It gave them actual data, not a projection based on averages of people they'd never met. Real data from their actual life. And with a $6,000 a month budget, Tom's $1.7 million was suddenly enough. He retired at 61 instead of 66. Got 5 years back. 5 healthy years. This is the flexibility option. It's the most powerful variable in the entire equation, and almost nobody uses it. Everyone treats their current lifestyle as fixed and then asks, how much money do I need to maintain this? But the better question is, what lifestyle would I actually enjoy, and how little can I spend to get it? Completely different calculation, completely different outcome. Now you're asking yourself, what if I cut spending and I'm miserable? What if I regret it? Here's the thing. There's actual research on what makes retirees happy. And it's not money. After you clear the baseline where you're not stressed about bills, more money doesn't correlate with more happiness. You know what does correlate? Time with people you care about. Autonomy over your schedule. A sense of purpose. None of those things require $7,000 a month, but all of them require time. And time is the one asset you cannot compound. It just runs out. Which brings me to reason number 4, and this one's uncomfortable. Relationships. Specifically, divorce. You know what costs more than retiring 2 years early? Splitting all your assets in half. I've watched this play out more times than I want to count. Couples spend 30 years optimizing for some future retirement date. They're stressed. They don't talk except about logistics. Kid needs braces. Mortgage is due. Can we afford to replace the roof? Everything's deferred until when we retire. And then one of 2 things happens. Either they retire and realize they have nothing in common anymore, nothing to talk about, and they split up, or one of them wakes up at 58 and says, I can't do 5 more years of this, and leaves before retirement. Either way, the person who stayed working extra years to be financially safe now has half the money and no partner. The financial plan was optimized for the wrong risk. Here's a short story that illustrates the point. There's a famous study from the 70s by a psychologist named John Gottman. He could predict with 94% accuracy whether a couple would divorce just by watching them interact for 15 minutes. What was he measuring? Contempt. The way people talk to each other when they're stressed and exhausted. And here's the connection. Do you know what creates contempt faster than anything? Years of sacrifice for a future payoff that never seems to arrive. That's the emotional balance sheet nobody's tracking. The retirement industrial complex wants you to think the biggest risk is market volatility or inflation. But for most people, the biggest risk is opportunity cost. The cost of not investing in your relationship while you still have energy. The cost of waiting until you're too tired to care. By the time most people retire, they've spent decades as financial partners, not romantic partners. They're roommates managing a household budget. And then they're supposed to suddenly spend all day together and be happy about it? Good luck. Now, to be fair, this isn't everyone. Some people genuinely love their jobs. Some people have great relationships with their spouses, and work doesn't strain that. If that's you, fantastic. Keep working. But if you're holding on because you're scared of the spreadsheet, and that stress is slowly poisoning the relationships that actually matter, you're optimizing for the wrong variable. You're measuring what's easy to measure, not what's important. Reason number 5, you can always make more money. You cannot make more time. This is the part where people's brains break because it contradicts everything you've been told. You're supposed to save for retirement, then live off the savings. That's the model. But that model assumes you become completely unemployable the day you retire. And that's just not true anymore. Let me give you a concrete case study with real numbers. A guy named Paul worked in procurement for a pharmaceutical company, made $130,000 a year, retired at 63 with 1.9 million saved up. His budget was $75,000 a year, which his advisor said was cutting it close. 4% rule said he could pull $76,000, but taxes and healthcare and inflation made it tight. Paul was nervous. Year 2 of retirement, Paul got bored, started doing consulting work, 3 days a month. No stress, no commute, just answering questions for smaller companies that couldn't afford a full-time procurement director. Made $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year. That one change meant he was only pulling $51,000 from his portfolio instead of $75,000, which meant his money would last basically forever. But more importantly, he liked the work. It gave him structure, felt useful. Here's the kicker. Paul could have done that consulting while working full-time, but he was too exhausted. Retirement gave him the space to figure out what kind of work he actually enjoyed. And it turns out a tiny amount of enjoyable work beats a massive amount of soul-crushing work, even if the latter pays more. This is the concept of enough. Once you have enough money to not be stressed, additional money has declining marginal utility. But time has increasing marginal utility the less of it you have. Now, I can already hear the objection. What if I can't find part-time work? What if nobody wants to hire a 65-year-old? Fair. But here's the reality. If you're watching this video, you probably have skills. You've been working for decades. You know things. And the gig economy, for all its flaws, has made it possible to monetize small amounts of expertise in ways that didn't exist 20 years ago. You can consult. You can teach online. You can do bookkeeping, project management, editing, design, coaching. None of these require a full-time commitment. All of them can generate $20,000 to $30,000 a year with minimal effort. And if you can't find work or don't want to, here's the other option. You can cut spending more. I know, that sounds miserable. But remember test driving the budget? If you've already done that, you know what's actually painful to cut versus what's just habit. Most people never get to that point because they're too busy working to think about it. There's a concept in military strategy called preserving optionality. It means keeping your choices open as long as possible. The longer you work in a job you hate, the fewer options you have. Your health declines, your energy drops, your network atrophies because you've been too busy to maintain it. By the time you retire safely, you've closed off most of the doors that could have made early retirement viable. You've traded optionality for the illusion of security. Let me hit you with one more story, and this one's my favorite. There's a fishing village in Mexico. American investment banker is on vacation, sees a fisherman bringing in his boat at noon. Banker asks, Why are you done already? You could fish longer, catch more. Fisherman says, I caught enough. Now I'll have lunch with my family, take a nap, play with my kids. Banker says, but if you fished all day, you could save money, buy more boats, hire a crew, eventually own a fleet, and retire rich. Fisherman asks, then what? Banker says, then you could relax, spend time with your family, enjoy your life. Fisherman looks at him and says, what do you think I'm doing now? That parable is about optimization. The banker is optimizing for net worth. The fisherman is optimizing for life satisfaction. Neither is wrong, but they're solving for different equations. And most people in the retirement planning world are solving the banker's equation without ever asking if it's the right one. Here's the truth nobody in the financial services industry wants you to understand. Retirement isn't a math problem. It's a philosophy problem. What are you optimizing for? Maximum net worth at death? Maximum years lived? Maximum healthy years enjoyed? Maximum time with people you love? Those are all different targets. And the calculator doesn't ask which one matters to you. It just assumes you want the biggest number possible with the least risk. But the least risky financial plan might be the riskiest life plan. So let's bring this back to the beginning. Dave, my neighbor, worked 5 extra years because of a 12% chance of running out of money, died with his New Zealand tickets on the desk. That 12% probability was based on historical market returns and inflation assumptions and mortality tables, all useful data. But it couldn't account for the 99% chance that Dave would regret waiting. It couldn't measure the cost of tickets never used. This is why I said retirement planning is a game of chicken with death. You're betting you'll have time later, and the house always wins that bet eventually. The only question is how much you lose before you figure it out. 3 practical takeaways. First, test drive a lower budget for 1 year while you're still working. Don't guess, don't use a calculator, actually live it. If it works, you just bought yourself years. If it doesn't, you learn something useful and you can adjust. Second, calculate your healthy life expectancy, not your life expectancy. Go find that World Health Organization data. Be honest about your health. Then work backwards from 66, not 90. That's your real timeline. Third, build a flexibility plan. What could you do for income if you needed an extra $20,000 a year? Write down 5 options, even bad options. Just knowing you have levers to pull changes the entire psychological equation. One more thing. That Michael Kitces study I mentioned earlier, the one showing people die with most of their money, he found something else interesting. The people who spent their money down, who actually used it, reported being happier in retirement than the people who hoarded it. Not because they had better stuff, but because spending the money validated that their years of work meant something. It gave their sacrifice purpose. The people who never spent it, they just felt like they wasted their lives saving for nothing. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do. And 99% of people are retiring too late based on advice from people who profit when they work longer. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for you.